Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the winding, spice-scented streets of ancient Baghdad, where minarets pierce the dusky sky and lanterns flicker like captive fireflies. You can almost hear the distant echo of prayer calls blending with the clatter of market stalls being closed for the evening. Tonight, you're walking in worn leather sandals alongside a man who limps with every step, his left knee stiff and aching from an accident long ago. This is the barber's first brother, and whether you like it or not, you're about to discover how a single foolish moment turned his life from hopeful merchant to ragged exile. You probably won't survive this, if we're being honest, though your demise will be purely emotional, as you watch him stumble through humiliation after humiliation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my sleepy little history crew is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're following him now, the barber's first brother, as he shuffles along the crowded market road at sunset, clutching a small cloth pouch of copper coins tied tightly to his belt. His tunic is plain cream linen, sweat-stained around the collar from a day spent negotiating sandalwood prices and inspecting dried dates for wormholes. He has a patchy black beard that never quite grows in fully on his cheeks, and his left eye droops slightly, giving him a look of perpetual confusion. The market is chaos. Sellers screaming about fresh pomegranates from Shiraz, fat men bickering over camel harnesses, two skinny children chasing each other with sticks. A caged mynah bird beside a perfume stall imitates the merchant's sales pitch in a squeaky voice, to everyone's annoyance. Historians still argue whether Baghdad's street birds were taught phrases intentionally to attract customers or simply mimicked out of boredom. The barber's first brother, let's call him Naji for ease, though his name's been lost to time, is thinking only of supper. His left leg drags behind him as he picks through the crowds, dreaming of fried aubergines, maybe some lentil stew with cumin and coriander. He's nearly at the end of the spice row, where ground turmeric forms bright golden dunes in wide ceramic bowls, when his attention catches on something high above street level. A balcony, carved sandalwood railing, drapes of indigo linen pulled back in the evening breeze, and leaning out over the balcony, one slim hand gripping the rail, is a woman in a black silk veil. Her eyes, that's all you can see, are lined with kohl so dark it looks almost blue in the golden light. And though you're standing here beside Naji in the market, you can practically feel your chest tighten with that same ridiculous, unstoppable ache. He stops walking. Someone curses behind him as they nearly trip over his dragging foot. But he doesn't care. For a long moment, he's frozen there, staring at the veiled woman above. She doesn't wave or beckon. She doesn't even lower her gaze. She simply looks at him with a flat, unreadable stare, as though he were a stain on the street stones or a stray dog whining for scraps. And yet in that look, he feels something explode, like rosewater steam flooding his brain, clouding any rational thought. You, standing there invisible beside him, know exactly what's happening. His heart is thudding, his mouth is dry, and every bit of life advice the barber ever gave him about keeping his desires in check has just evaporated into the Baghdad dusk. Here's a historical fact to distract you from the idiocy of what's about to happen. In medieval Baghdad, markets closed at dusk not only for religious reasons, but also to limit petty theft under cover of darkness. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some stallholders kept scorpions in clay pots as protection charms for their wares, believing the scorpion's sting would curse thieves with incurable boils. I guess a modern security camera is slightly more humane. But Naji isn't thinking of scorpions or market closing. He's thinking only of that woman in the veil, how her gaze feels like a hook buried in his ribs, tugging him upward towards a future he cannot imagine. A future that, spoiler alert, probably won't end with a happy wedding and 12 chubby babies crawling around a fountain courtyard. A small boy in a faded green tunic tugs at his sleeve. Naji jerks back to reality, nearly stumbling into a pyramid of garlic bulbs. The boy looks up at him with huge brown eyes and holds out a folded scrap of parchment tied with crimson thread. Naji takes it, hands shaking slightly, and before he can say a word, the boy slips away into the market crowd, vanishing like smoke on a windy day. His heart is pounding so hard it hurts. You watch him slip the note into his belt with trembling fingers, eyes darting around to make sure no one saw. The world suddenly feels different. The market noise becomes a low, buzzing drone. The last rays of sun flicker across polished brass lamps hanging from vendor stalls. A donkey brays somewhere, long and shrill. But Naji hears only his own heartbeat and feels only the cool, delicate brush of that woman's gaze lingering on his skin like invisible perfume. He hobbles away, desperate to read the note, desperate to know what her delicate black-veiled eyes might have whispered into that boy's ear before sending him down to the street. And behind him, unnoticed, the veiled woman turns and disappears into the shadows of her balcony chamber, her silk veil drifting like dark smoke in the evening breeze. You follow Naji as he ducks into a quiet side alley, away from the clamor of merchants packing up their baskets and the final prayer calls rolling through the city. The walls here are close together, built from sun-baked clay brick, still radiating the heat of the day. The smell of camel dung drifts faintly from somewhere nearby. It's not the most romantic setting, but right now, Naji doesn't care. His heart is thundering so hard you almost feel it echo through your own chest. He leans against the wall, glancing around to make sure no nosy date seller or lantern lighter is watching, then fumbles with the crimson thread binding the parchment. The note unfolds in his shaking hands, and you can almost hear the scratch of reed pen on rough paper as he reads. "Come to me when the moon is highest tonight. Enter through the small gate beside the perfumer's stall. Knock 3 times. Speak no word. My servants will bring you to me." That's it. No signature, no flowery declarations of undying passion, just an order, and yet Naji feels his knees go weak with relief and exultation. He presses the parchment to his lips for a moment, eyes fluttering shut. If anyone saw him right now, they'd think he was praying. But his prayer is nothing but silent gratitude to whatever sly desert spirit arranged this meeting. Historians still argue whether the story of the Barber's brothers is purely moralistic fiction or based on real events embroidered by storytellers to amuse tired caravan guards in the Baghdad inns. Personally, standing here beside Naji, you'd wager no one could invent such bottomless foolishness from thin air. People are simply this idiotic all by themselves. The market alley is dark now, lit only by the flickering oil lamp of an old perfumer's stall nearby. The old man there is closing up, his beard yellowed with years of saffron dust, as he locks away jars of rose attar, oud resin, and civet musk in iron-banded chests. You watch Naji glance at the stall, realizing this is the landmark from her note. He counts the closed doorways along the alley, searching for the small gate she mentioned. For a moment, a tremor of doubt ripples through him. What if it's a trap? What if the woman's husband is a jealous merchant with an army of eunuch guards who will slice him to ribbons for daring to look at her? But then he remembers her eyes, that dark, unwavering gaze that seemed to pierce his soul, and all caution evaporates like morning dew in the desert sun. He limps back to his tiny rented room near the tanner's quarter, climbs the rickety wooden stairs, and bolts the thin door behind him. Inside, the single oil lamp flickers on a cracked pottery dish. The walls are bare except for a faded blue tapestry depicting date palms and running gazelles. His low-sleeping mat smells faintly of goat hair and old sweat. Not exactly a palace, but tonight, he barely notices his poverty. He is too busy picturing rich tapestries, perfumed rooms, servants bowing low, and her, always her, waiting with soft dark eyes and a smile hidden behind her veil. He lies back, arms crossed behind his head, staring at the wooden ceiling beams as shadows dance from the lamp's flicker. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep you awake with mild horror. Medieval Arab doctors believed staring too long at bright lamps before sleep could cause permanent blindness or hallucinations involving black dogs. So, if you see a ghostly black hound padding through your dreams tonight, you can blame Naji's lamp for cursing us both. Outside, the city sinks into darkness. Distant dogs bark. Somewhere far away, a camel bell jingles as a late caravan enters the city gates. Naji forces himself to wait until the moon rises high above the rooftops, casting everything in its silent blue-silver glow. Then, with trembling hands, he splashes stale rosewater on his neck, adjusts his frayed cream turban, and ties the last coin he owns into his belt, just in case there is an entrance fee to this paradise awaiting him. He moves through the silent streets like a ghost, dragging his bad leg with every step. The alleyways are deathly quiet now, the market stalls closed and shuttered, guard patrols long since passed. Shadows ripple across stone and plaster as he passes under crumbling archways. The moonlight catches on the dark water of the narrow canal running behind the perfumer's row, turning its sluggish surface to molten silver. When he reaches the perfumer's stall, it is locked tight, silent as a tomb. The old man is gone. Naji's pulse is a deafening drumbeat in his ears as he searches along the wall beside the shop. And there it is, half hidden behind a rotting date crate, a small wooden gate, warped by decades of sun. Its iron studs rusted, the lock scratched with deep gouges from old keys and hopeful intruders. He hesitates. This is your last chance. You want to whisper to him. Turn back, go home, eat your lentil stew in peace and dream of her from afar. But Naji takes a shaking breath, closes his eyes, and raises his fist to knock. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound is shockingly loud in the silent alley. For a long moment, nothing happens. He stands there, his mouth dry, sweat prickling down his back despite the cool desert night air. Then he hears it, the scrape of wood against stone, the faint rustle of fabric, the metallic rattle of a chain being lifted on the other side of the gate. A thin sliver of orange lamplight slices into the moonlit alley as the gate creaks inward, revealing darkness beyond. Naji takes a deep breath, tasting dust and rosewater on his tongue, and steps forward into the shadows, leaving the silent alley behind. You slip through the gate right behind Naji, silent as his terrified shadow. The door closes behind you with a muffled thud that seems to echo inside your chest. For a moment, the darkness is complete, thick and smothering. Then a soft orange glow flickers ahead as a servant holding a brass oil lamp steps forward. He's young, perhaps 12 or 13, with a shaved head and wide, wary eyes rimmed with kohl. Without a word, he bows and gestures for Naji to follow. The corridor is narrow, lined with polished marble tiles veined in green and gray. The air smells of cardamom, frankincense, and something sharper, maybe myrrh oil or saffron dye. As you walk behind them, the lamp's glow casts Naji's jerky, limping shadow onto the walls like some twisted puppet show. Every step echoes faintly under the high-arched ceiling. He wants to ask questions, You can almost hear the words bubbling in his throat. Where is she? Does she wait for me awake? Does she smile at my arrival? But he remembers the note's warning, speak no word, and clamps his mouth shut so tightly his teeth ache. Historians still argue whether these silent servant escorts were a real practice in merchant mansions or a purely literary flourish to build tension in oral storytelling. After all, what's a forbidden love story without shadowy lamp-bearers guiding foolish men into deeper folly? The boy leads him through 2 archways into a vast entry hall. Even in lamplight you see the glint of inlaid lapis tiles underfoot. Date palm motifs swirl up the carved cedar columns. High above, a wooden balcony with lattice screens runs along the inner walls. There are no voices here, no giggling maids or bustling guards, only silence so heavy it seems to press on your shoulders. Then Naji's breath catches. At the far end of the hall, framed by 2 tall brass floor lamps, stands the woman from the balcony. Still veiled, still silent. She is draped now in dark crimson silk embroidered with golden pomegranates and curling vines. Her black veil glimmers faintly in the lamp's glow. She doesn't move as he approaches, doesn't speak, only watches with those fathomless coal-lined eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit to jar you from this heady tension. In medieval Arabia, coal was not merely cosmetic. Mixed with lead sulfide or antimony, it was believed to protect against eye infections and glare from desert sun, though modern historians still argue whether its protective effects outweighed lead poisoning risks over a lifetime. So if you're planning a desert trek tomorrow, maybe stick to sunglasses. The boy kneels and sets the lamp before her feet, then backs away into the shadows. Naji stands trembling, staring at her. The silence stretches so long you feel yourself wanting to cough, just to break the spell. Finally, she raises one henna-tipped hand and beckons him forward. You feel his knees threaten to give out as he limps closer, head bowed in what might be respect or pure terror. She turns and glides away, her silk robes whispering across the marble floor, and he hobbles after her down another long corridor lined with glass lanterns in shades of ruby, emerald, and sapphire. Their colored light dapples the walls like submerged jewels. At last, they enter a smaller chamber. The ceiling is low here, beams of dark sandalwood crossing above carved plaster panels. Cushions are heaped along the walls in brilliant silks, turquoise, bronze, pomegranate red. In the center sits a wide brass tray laid with bowls of dates, honey-soaked pastries, roasted pistachios, and thin golden breads sprinkled with sesame seeds. Without a word, she sinks onto the cushions and gestures for him to sit opposite her. The silent boy reappears to pour cardamom coffee into tiny handleless cups. The steam curls into the perfumed air, carrying that bitter-sweet, citrusy aroma you can almost taste on your tongue. If you've never had real Arabic cardamom coffee before sleep, it's probably for the best. You'd be awake until dawn hearing your own heartbeat hammer in your chest. She lifts her veil just enough to sip her coffee. For a fleeting moment, he sees her lips, full, dark rose, curved in a tiny smile. And in that instant, all his caution vanishes like sugar in hot tea. He thinks of nothing but her mouth. He thinks he'd trade 1,000 market stalls, 1,000 quiet meals alone, for just one taste of that smile. You know where this is going. You want to shake him, tell him to stand up, thank her politely, and leave before his life unravels completely. But Naji is already gone, lost in the labyrinth of his own lust and illusions. She sets her cup down, gestures to the feast, and he eats ravenously. Fresh dates bursting with syrupy sweetness, pastries filled with almond paste and dusted with cinnamon, pistachios roasted to a deep, nutty warmth. All the while, her eyes never leave his. Silent maids drift in and out, refilling cups, removing empty plates, laying down fresh dishes of glazed figs and rosewater-soaked walnuts. Historians still argue whether such nocturnal feasts were common practice among merchant households or a fictional trope imported from Persian romance epics. Either way, you and I both know that midnight banquets rarely end with dawn happiness, especially when the guest is a poor market fool and the hostess is draped in secrets like silk. Finally, she leans back against the cushions, her veil hiding her face once more. She raises one slim finger. Instantly, the boy and two silent maids appear at her side. Naji's heart leaps, thinking perhaps she wishes to dismiss her servants so they might speak alone. He smiles like a lovesick puppy, wiping crumbs from his beard with trembling hands. But the servants do not leave. Instead, the maids take him gently by each arm, while the boy retrieves a small iron key from within his robes. For the first time all night, Naji's smile falters. His heart stutters. Something is very, very wrong. The boy crosses the room, kneels beside a carved wooden chest, and opens it to reveal heavy iron chains coiled inside like sleeping serpents. The woman gestures once, sharply, and her maids pull Naji to his feet. The boy rises with the chains in his hands, eyes downcast, and steps forward. Naji tries to speak, but his voice cracks into a squeak. The woman lifts her hand in a gesture of finality. Silence falls so deep you feel it ringing in your bones. And that, dear listener, is how you find yourself standing frozen in the lamplit chamber of a silent, veiled woman, watching as two slender maids drag a foolish market man towards an unthinkable fate. You stand silent against the cool plaster wall as the two maids grip Naji's trembling arms tighter, their bangles jingling softly with every movement. His knees buckle, and he tries to pull away, but they are stronger than they look. The boy sets the iron chains down beside him, each heavy link clinking dully on the marble floor. You watch Naji's eyes dart wildly around the room, searching for an escape, but there is only the doorway behind him, blocked by the veiled woman reclining on her cushions like a silent judge. Her gaze is utterly unreadable behind the black silk. A shiver ripples down your spine as the realization sinks in. He walked into this place thinking he'd find love, and instead, he's found something far older and colder. Historians still argue whether punishments like these were truly meted out by merchant women defending their honor, or whether this motif of humiliating male desire was a Persian storytelling device imported into Arabic oral tradition. Either way, you feel the tiny hairs on your arms rise as the boy retrieves two iron cuffs from the chest. They're black with age, the inside lined with copper to prevent immediate chafing. A small mercy in a large cruelty. Naji whimpers as they force him to his knees before her. The veiled woman raises one hand, and for a moment he believes, foolishly, that she will spare him. Perhaps she will declare it was a test of devotion. Perhaps she will invite him closer to whisper forgiveness. But instead, she flicks her wrist, and the maids press his shoulders down until his forehead touches the cold marble floor. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Medieval physicians believed bowing your head so low increased blood flow to the brain and enhanced dreams. Although whether those dreams were pleasant or nightmarish was left to Allah's will. The boy fastens one cuff around Naji's right ankle, then his left, linking them with a short iron chain. Each click echoes through the silent chamber, loud as a cannon in the stillness. Naji begins to sob, harsh, broken sobs that make his shoulders shake under the maid's slender hands. You wish you could look away, But there is nowhere to look except at the veiled woman, still reclining silently, unmoved by his weeping. Finally, the boy fastens a longer chain to the ankle cuffs and bolts it to an iron ring set deep into the marble floor. The chain is just long enough to let him sit upright, but too short to stand or reach the doorway. When it is done, the boy retreats, his small sandaled feet whispering against the tiles. Naji collapses onto his side, dragging the chains with a rattling clatter. His tears drip onto the polished floor. One of the maids wipes her hands on her robe and glides away without a backward glance. The other adjusts the silk pillows around her mistress and leaves silently. Only the boy remains, standing by the chest, waiting. The veiled woman rises. Her robes sigh against the floor as she walks towards Naji, her shadow swallowing his trembling body in flickering lamplight. She stops just beyond his reach. For a long moment, she stares down at him in silence. Then she turns, gestures to the boy, and sweeps from the room. The boy lifts the brass lamp and backs away, leaving Naji alone in the dim flicker of a single guttering wick. The doorway curtain falls closed behind them, and you hear the scrape of a bolt being dropped into place. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Naji curls up on the cold marble, chains digging into his ankles. His tears taste of salt and copper. The lamplight flickers, casting strange, wavering shadows across the carved beams overhead. He tries to imagine this is a dream. He tries to imagine he is still lying on his straw mat near the tanner's quarter, that he will wake to the smell of goat hair and stale lentil stew. But every time he moves, the bite of the iron cuffs reminds him that dreams are softer than this. Here's a mainstream historical fact to distract you. In Abbasid Baghdad, wealthy merchant houses often included secure basements or windowless rooms used as strong rooms, vaults, or places of punishment for servants and intruders. Though such chambers were rarely used for private revenge fantasies, you can see how easy it was to twist a room's purpose when rage or insult demanded repayment. Naji lies awake for hours, listening to the lamp hiss and gutter. The chain links grow warm from his body heat. The marble leaches the warmth from his skin wherever he lies still for too long. Outside, somewhere far above, he hears the faintest whisper of night wind through carved lattice windows. At times, distant footsteps echo through the silent house, but none approach his door. He is utterly alone. He thinks of the barber, his brother, always scolding him for chasing illusions. "If a veiled woman beckons from a balcony," the barber once said, "assume her husband has a sword." At the time, Naji had laughed. Now, the memory curls tight around his chest like a coiled snake, and somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the shame and terror, a single ridiculous thought keeps rising up. She fed me. She chose to feed me before chaining me. Perhaps there is still hope. Perhaps tomorrow she will forgive me. Perhaps tomorrow she will love me. You almost want to reach down, brush the sweaty curls from his forehead, and whisper the truth into his ear. There is no tomorrow here, only night after night of darkness and chains. But instead, you stand silent as his tears dry on the marble floor, listening to his ragged breathing and the distant creak of the house settling around him. Morning creeps into the marble chamber as a thin, pale glow seeping through the carved lattice high on the opposite wall. You watch as Naji stirs from a shallow, broken sleep. His body aches everywhere, neck stiff, ankles raw where the iron cuffs have rubbed them through the night. His head throbs with a dull pain. His mouth tastes like old dust and fear. For a moment, he forgets where he is, thinking he's back on his thin sleeping mat in his rented room near the tanner's quarter. Then he shifts, and the chain rattles against the floor. And reality clamps down again. He curls tighter on his side, trying to hide from the dawn. His stomach growls with a hollow, aching emptiness. Here's a quirky tidbit to flavor your pity. Medieval Arab physicians recommended vinegar mixed with caraway seeds as an appetite suppressant. Useful advice if you're trapped in chains and the thought of food makes you want to retch with shame. The door creaks open. You see him flinch violently, his shoulders trembling as the boy enters, carrying a small brass tray. On it sits a rough clay bowl of dates, dry, shriveled, the cheapest market rejects, and a tin cup of tepid water. Without looking at Naji, the boy sets the tray on the floor just out of reach of the chain's end. For a moment, he hesitates, glancing down with those wide brown eyes that look far too knowing for his age. Then he turns and slips out of the room, the bolt scraping closed behind him. Naji lies staring at the tray for a long time. The smell of old dates mingles with the sour sweat pooling under his robes. He drags himself forward inch by inch, the iron cuffs biting into his ankles until his fingers graze the edge of the bowl. He pulls it close and eats silently, the dried flesh sticking in his throat. Each bite is a battle not to gag. He drinks the lukewarm water in tiny sips, trying to stretch it out, as though rationing this single cup might somehow anchor him to sanity. Historians still argue whether these humiliating imprisonments were acts of legal punishment by household authorities, or symbolic embellishments woven into stories to warn young men against lustful delusion. Personally, as you sit watching Naji choke down his stale dates, you suspect reality never needed embellishment? People have always invented cruelties creative enough on their own. Hours pass. The sun creeps higher, throwing shifting lattice shadows across the marble floor. Naji dozes, waking each time his head slips sideways and the iron chain tugs his ankles sharply. Once, he hears footsteps approaching and his heart leaps into his throat, but they pass by. Silence returns, heavy and suffocating. In late afternoon, the boy returns to collect the empty bowl and cup. This time, he brings no fresh tray. Naji's dry, cracked lips move in a desperate whisper. "Please, water." But the boy keeps his eyes downcast and leaves without a word. Night falls again. The shadows thicken into pitch darkness. No lamp is lit this time. You hear the sounds of the house above. Distant laughter. The soft notes of an oud played somewhere far away. A woman's low voice singing a sad, curling melody. For a moment, Naji thinks it is her voice, the woman in the crimson robe. He imagines her seated on silk cushions, surrounded by friends, telling them how a limping fool wandered willingly into her chains. He curls up tight, pressing his forehead to the cold marble, trying to block out the shame blooming in his chest like a poisoned flower. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. During the Abbasid era, wealthy homes often held music recitals in private salons, featuring female singers known as Qian, highly trained in poetry, music, and courtly conversation. Historians still argue whether the Qian were respected intellectual companions or commodified courtesans. Likely, as with all things, they were both and neither, depending on who owned their contract. The hours drag on. Naji's stomach cramps with hunger. His throat is dry as river dust. He dreams in feverish snatches. The woman's eyes, a veil drifting across his vision. The scent of cardamom coffee so strong he wakes with his tongue swollen against his teeth. Sometimes he hears whispering voices just beyond the door. Sometimes he thinks he hears the creak of the bolt being lifted. But no one enters. He loses track of time. The lamp remains unlit. The chain grows heavier with each passing hour, as though it is sinking him deeper and deeper into the marble floor. At one point, he tries to stand, but the short chain jerks him back, and he crashes onto his knees, biting his tongue so hard he tastes blood. Here's a joke to lighten your heart before sleep steals you. What do you call a merchant chained in a dark room with nothing but dry dates to eat? The perfect medieval weight loss plan. Don't try this at home, or anywhere, really. Finally, he gives up trying to track day or night. The door opens at irregular intervals. Sometimes the boy brings stale dates and water, sometimes nothing. No one speaks to him. No one looks at him. He begins talking to himself, whispering half-remembered market prayers, murmuring trade sums under his breath as though listing sandalwood and saffron prices might anchor him to who he used to be. And through it all, you stand in the corner, silent and invisible, watching him shrink from a hopeful merchant into a chained, weeping wretch. You want to reach out and touch his bowed head, tell him this will end soon, but you know it won't end the way he dreams. The veiled woman doesn't visit him. No forgiveness comes. Only the slow suffocation of hope under the iron weight of his own foolishness. You stand over Naji as dawn breaks for the 5th time since he first entered this house. The dim blue light seeps through the carved lattice, casting patterned shadows across his gaunt face. His beard has grown scruffy and patchy, speckled with dried drool and crumbs. His eyes flutter open, crusted with sleep, and for a moment there is confusion, that flicker of hope that he is waking in his small rented room to the scent of frying bread on the street below. But then the iron cuffs scrape against his swollen ankles as he shifts, and reality washes over him with a suffocating weight. The door opens. The boy enters, carrying a tray balanced carefully in his thin arms. Naji perks up slightly, despite himself. Hunger overrides dignity now. The boy sets down a bowl of rice, cooked with fat and sprinkled with black cumin seeds, along with half a flatbread torn jagged at the edges, and a small cup of water. Naji's fingers shake as he reaches for the food. And for the briefest moment, the boy looks into his eyes. There is something there. Pity, perhaps, or fear at what his mistress commands. Then he turns away quickly, collecting the empty date bowl from yesterday before disappearing through the door. The bolt slides closed with its now familiar scrape of finality. Naji eats greedily. The rice is cold, clumped together in sticky lumps, but to him it tastes better than any banquet. He licks every grain from his fingers. Then he sits back against the wall, closing his eyes as the humid morning air rises through the small lattice window high above. Historians still argue whether such long, humiliating imprisonments were common punishment for trespassing or merely cautionary parables about male arrogance told by market storytellers to gather coins. Some medieval records mention chained debtors and thieves locked in merchants' cellars, but none mention men imprisoned by a woman's silent fury alone. After he eats, he drifts into shallow, ragged sleep. He dreams of the market, of bright mounds of turmeric and saffron, of garlic bulbs piled like pale stones, of the old mynah bird by the perfume stall that mimicked the seller's voice. In his dream, the bird screeches, "Chains for sale! Chains for sale!" and everyone laughs as he limps by, dragging iron behind him. He wakes coughing, throat burning for water. The cup from breakfast is empty. His tongue scrapes dryly against his teeth. The boy does not return until dusk. When he does, he brings only a half-filled cup of tepid water and no food. Naji stares up at him, tears brimming in his sunken eyes. "Please," he rasps. His voice cracks like broken pottery. "Please, tell her, forgive me." The boy flinches as though struck, then turns quickly away and leaves. The bolt slams down. Silence returns. Naji leans forward until his forehead rests against the marble floor. He stays that way for a long time, praying to any god who might listen, to Allah, to the Prophet's intercession, even to the jinn of the desert winds, that the woman might soften her heart. Here's a quirky tidbit to distract you from his hopelessness. Medieval Baghdad perfumes often contained ambergris, a waxy substance found in the intestines of sperm whales and washed up on beaches, prized for its musky, oceanic scent. Historians still argue whether it was used more as a skin perfume or burned as incense in grand merchant halls. Night falls again. But this time, the door opens just as the first silver moonlight creeps across the floor. Two maids enter with small brass oil lamps held high. Their shadows stretch across the chamber, flickering like silent specters. Behind them walks the veiled woman. She is clad once more in her dark crimson silk robe, embroidered with golden pomegranates, her black veil shimmering under lamplight. Naji lifts his head from the floor, hope igniting in his chest so fiercely it hurts. He tries to kneel upright, but the chain is too short. Instead, he ends up half-bowed before her, his thin hands trembling in his lap. You see his eyes glisten in the dim orange light as she approaches. For a long moment, she stands silent, staring down at him. Her maids stand on either side, still as carved ivory. The only sound is Naji's ragged, shallow breathing. Finally, she lifts one hand, and the maids kneel to place the lamps on the floor. Their glow spills outwards, revealing the grime caked on his ankles, the bruises blossoming across his knees, the raw, chafed skin under the iron cuffs. She steps closer. You can smell her perfume even from here. Amber, oud, and a faint, sharp bite of myrrh. She bends slightly, just enough for her veil to sway forward, and for a fleeting heartbeat, he thinks she might touch him. Instead, she raises her other hand and snaps her fingers. The maids rise. One produces a small brass key. She kneels and unlocks the iron cuffs from Naji's swollen ankles. The chain rattles onto the marble. Naji gasps in disbelief, clutching his freed legs. He looks up at the veiled woman, tears streaming down his face. His lips move in silent thanks, praise, desperate promises of devotion. She turns without a word, her robes swirling around her ankles. The maids gather the lamps and chains and follow her out. The boy enters silently from behind, gestures for Naji to rise, and points towards the door. Naji tries to stand. His legs give out. He scrambles to his feet again, using the wall for support, his bad knee screaming with each step. Here's your mainstream historical fact to frame his misery. Punishment by imprisonment often carried lifelong stigma in medieval Islamic society, branding the freed as untrustworthy, regardless of their crime. Reputation was everything. And Naji's is about to crumble. The boy leads him through the dim hallways, past the colored glass lanterns, past the vast entry hall with its lapis tiles, past the sandalwood columns carved with swirling vines. Every step is agony. His legs tremble under him, but he keeps hobbling forward, half walking, half dragging himself towards the faint promise of freedom beyond the mansion gates. At the final door, the boy opens it onto the silent, moonlit street. Without looking back, he gestures for Naji to leave. And with one last, trembling glance over his shoulder at the house that chained and fed him, humiliated and enchanted him, Naji limps out into the silent Baghdad night. The cool night air hits Naji's face like a slap, smelling of dust, donkey dung, and faint jasmine drifting down from rooftop gardens. He staggers into the empty alley, his bare feet scraping the worn stones. The gate closes softly behind him. leaving him alone under the wan silver moonlight. For a long moment, he just stands there, swaying slightly, staring at the closed gate as if it might reopen and invite him back into its perfumed nightmare. Then his legs buckle, and he sinks to his knees on the cold ground, tears dripping silently onto the dusty stones below. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In medieval Baghdad, people believed tears of humiliation carried physical sickness if left unwashed. Street bathhouses often saw men arrive before dawn to wash away tears before anyone could see them glisten on beards at sunrise. Finally, Naji drags himself upright, using the wall for support. His bad knee screams with every step. He limps slowly through the deserted alleys, past shuttered stalls, overturned baskets, and sleeping stray dogs curled up in doorways. Each shuffle sends shocks of pain up his leg, but he barely notices. His mind is blank, emptied by hunger, shame, and exhausted relief. Historians still argue whether this part of the Barber's brother's tale was meant as a moral punishment narrative or a dark comedic warning about lust. Either way, you watch him limp onwards, his swollen ankles leaving faint smears of dried blood where the iron cuffs rubbed his skin raw. At last, he reaches his rented room near the tanner's quarter. He fumbles with the latch, pushes the thin wooden door open, and steps inside. The darkness feels almost comforting after the harsh lamplight of his imprisonment. The familiar smell of goat hair mats, stale lentil stew, and damp walls fills his lungs. For the first time in days, he feels a flicker of safety. He collapses onto his mat, curling up tightly, hugging his aching knees to his chest. The straw pokes into his cheek, but he welcomes it. Physical discomfort feels real, grounding, compared to the dreamlike horror of what he has just survived. Outside, dawn is rising. The prayer call drifts faintly through the tanner alleys, long and melodic, curling under doorways and around cracked brick walls like a benevolent spirit. But Naji does not pray. He lies still, staring at the dark beams overhead, listening to the neighbor's rooster crow over and over until the sound merges with his ragged breathing. Here's a mainstream historical fact to color this bleak dawn. The first prayer call, Fajr, often began in Baghdad before true dawn light appeared, aligning city life with both spiritual discipline and practical trade schedules for markets and caravans. Hours pass. The sun rises higher, filling his tiny room with dusty gold light. Hunger gnaws at his stomach, but he has no coins left for food. His belt purse, tied with such care days earlier, lies empty under his robe. He thinks of the market, the bright pyramids of turmeric and saffron, the garlic bulbs piled like moonlit stones. He wonders if he will ever walk there again without limping, without people staring at his chain-bruised ankles and whispering behind their hands. At midday, he forces himself to stand. Every muscle burns with weakness. He limps out into the blinding street. Children stare. A hawker calls out an insult about his limp. He ignores them all, making his way to the mosque courtyard fountain. There, he washes his tear-streaked face and drinks handfuls of cool water until his thirst eases and his hands stop trembling. He sits in the mosque shade for hours, listening to old men discussing trade routes to Basra and gossiping about a camel caravan that brought indigo from India last week. Their words drift around him like smoke. He understands none of it. His mind is filled only with her eyes, her veil, the clinking iron cuffs, the cold marble against his cheek. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether the barber's brother ever recovered from his humiliation or whether he wandered the markets for years. a broken man telling his story to anyone who would buy him a cup of cardamom coffee. Late afternoon falls. The mosque shadows stretch long across the dusty courtyard. Finally, Naji pushes himself upright. He limps away down the narrow alleys, ignoring the merchant's stares. His knee drags painfully with each step, but you sense something hardening inside him, like cooled iron. Shame has burned away his foolishness, leaving only bitter resolve. As evening descends, he returns to his tiny room, eats a handful of stale lentils left in a clay bowl by his mat, and lies down again. Outside, the call to prayer rises once more, carried on the dusk wind over tiled rooftops and darkening streets. He closes his eyes, but sleep does not come easily. Each time he drifts close, he feels the iron cuffs bite into his ankles again, hears the clink of chains on marble. He tastes cardamom coffee on his tongue. He sees her eyes gazing down at him, dark and calm, veiled from any understanding. And you, standing silent in the corner, watching his chest rise and fall, wonder whether he dreams of her forgiveness, or whether his dreams are filled only with the endless echo of his own sobs in that silent, lamplit chamber. The next morning dawns with a hot, breathless wind rattling loose shutters along the alleyway. You watch Naji wake slowly, as though his body is reluctant to return to the world. He blinks at the cracked plaster ceiling, eyes bloodshot, his lips dry and split from days of little water. His legs ache so badly it takes him several minutes just to sit upright. Every movement reminds him of those iron cuffs biting into his flesh. He drags himself to the low clay basin in the corner, splashes his face with stale water, and drinks deeply, letting some dribble down his chin onto his ragged robe. Then he pushes himself upright and limps out into the already blazing street. The market is coming alive. Merchants shout over each other. Children weave through donkey carts, and pigeons flutter down from the rooftops to peck at dropped grains. Naji keeps his gaze low, avoiding the perfume sellers, the date vendors, the sandal merchants. He no longer cares about their wares. All he can think of is her, and the chains. Here's your quirky tidbit for the morning. Medieval Baghdad's pigeons were often trained as message carriers between market districts, tied with thin parchment strips under their wings. Historians still argue whether these city pigeons carried more gossip or trade orders across the Abbasid capital's dense neighborhoods. He hobbles to his usual corner stall, owned by a thin old man with a beard dyed henna orange, who sells fried chickpea patties wrapped in thin flatbread. Naji has no coins left, but his stomach aches with a hollow, burning pain. He stands silently by the stall, hoping the old man will take pity and give him scraps. The vendor glances down at his swollen ankles, the dark bruises visible above his worn sandals. For a moment, his lined face softens with something like pity. He tears half a stale flatbread from yesterday's basket and tosses it to Naji without a word. Naji mumbles a broken thanks and limps away to a quiet alley to eat in peace. He sits in the shadow of a crumbling brick wall, chewing slowly, the dry bread scraping his throat with each swallow. Pigeons coo above him, strutting along the parapet with their iridescent necks flashing in the sun. His thoughts drift between hunger and shame. Sometimes he imagines her standing before him again, veiled and silent, watching as he eats dirt for her amusement. Other times, he imagines her weeping in regret, summoning him back to her perfumed chamber. But mostly, he just feels empty. Historians still argue whether men like Naji were pitied or scorned by their communities after such public humiliation. In popular oral stories, they are mocked as fools. In legal records, they often vanish completely, erased by shame from any further mention. By late morning, the market swells with heat. Naji limps towards the covered arcade, where metalworkers pound sheets of copper into basins and lamps. The rhythmic clang echoes through the narrow passageway, mingling with the hiss of quenching water and the deep hum of chanting verses some metalworkers recite to keep time. Here's your mainstream historical fact to carry with you today. Metalworking guilds in medieval Baghdad often included both free craftsmen and skilled slaves. Their knowledge passed through generations, their chants blending Quranic verses with work rhythms to create what scholars call vocational liturgy. Naji stands watching a metalsmith hammer intricate floral patterns into a brass incense burner. The sharp scent of heated metal fills the air. For a moment, he imagines buying such a burner for her chamber, filling it with frankincense and myrrh to please her. The thought makes his chest tighten painfully. He turns away before tears can well up again. He limps back to his small room near the tanner's quarter by noon. The streets shimmer with heat. Donkey carts creak under towering loads of firewood, and beggars sit slumped in doorways with flies crawling across their eyes. Naji drags himself up the rickety stairs, collapses onto his mat, and lies staring at the ceiling beams until dusk. Night falls. The wind shifts, bringing cooler air and the smell of river reeds and fish from the Tigris. Somewhere nearby, a lute player begins a melancholy tune that drifts up through the dark alleys like perfume. Naji closes his eyes, letting the music wrap around him. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether the lute melodies of Abbasid Baghdad followed strict Persian modal traditions or evolved unique Iraqi styles later carried into Andalusian Spain. As the music fades, Naji dozes lightly, his dreams flickering with broken images, the veiled woman's eyes, the glint of iron chains in lamplight, the quiet scuff of the boy servant's feet on polished marble. Sometimes he dreams she calls him back, her voice soft and trembling. Other times, he dreams he is back in her chamber, chained forever, darkness pressing down like stone. You watch him as he shifts and whimpers in his sleep, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool night air drifting through his cracked window shutters. You wish you could ease his breathing, smooth the worry from his furrowed brow. But you know no comfort can touch a man who has tasted both heaven and hell in the same silent woman's gaze. And so you stand beside him, silent as the darkness itself, waiting to see whether dawn will bring him resolve, ruin, or some bitter combination of both. Morning comes with a pale, dusty light filtering through the cracked shutters. You stand by Naji's mat as he wakes, his body sore and stiff, every joint aching as though beaten with rods. He sits up slowly, wincing at the deep purple bruises blooming around his ankles like poisonous flowers. His mouth is dry, his lips cracked, but he forces himself upright and limps out into the silent street. The alley smells of donkey dung, stale cooking oil, and wood smoke drifting from bakeries kindling their morning ovens. The call to prayer rings out, echoing between the narrow brick walls, mingling with the rustle of pigeons as they swoop down to peck at fallen grains. Naji doesn't pause to pray. His thoughts are consumed by her eyes, her veil, the silent snap of her fingers commanding his chains to be locked or freed. Here's your quirky tidbit to carry with your coffee. Medieval Arab bakers often used willow wood for their ovens because it burned long and produced minimal soot, keeping bread clean and lightly scented. Historians still argue whether willow smoke imparted a faintly sweet flavor, or if that's just romanticized nostalgia wafting down the centuries. He limps along the market street, ignoring hawkers' calls. Their bright pyramids of spices blur before his tired eyes. He passes a myna bird perched on its cage, who squawks, "Fresh mint! Fresh mint!" in perfect imitation of its vendor. The sound pierces straight into his chest. Mint. She smelled faintly of mint, among the amber and oud. His throat tightens painfully. He stops by the mosque courtyard fountain, splashes cool water onto his face, and drinks until his stomach cramps. He sits in the shaded arcade, watching merchants haggle and children chase each other with sticks. But none of it feels real to him anymore. All he sees is her silent gaze, the flick of her henna-tipped fingers commanding his humiliation. Around noon, the sun blazes down mercilessly, shimmering off brass lamps and copper basins. Naji drags himself back to his room, where the heat clings to the walls like wet cloth. He lies on his mat, staring at the beams above, listening to the flies buzzing lazily near the clay water jar in the corner. Historians still argue whether prisoners of private punishment like Naji's brother often developed what modern psychologists call captor fixation, a desperate emotional attachment born of terror, hunger, and fleeting moments of kindness. You watch him now, his eyes open but unfocused, and you know he is replaying each moment of her presence in the silent darkness of his mind. That evening, as dusk deepens into velvety indigo, he rises and limps back out onto the street. His bad knee drags painfully, his gait uneven and slow. He passes the brass incense seller, who wrinkles his nose at the smell of unwashed man drifting past. Two young porters carrying sacks of wheat on their shoulders shout insults about his limp. He ignores them all. Here's your mainstream historical fact to enrich your night. Baghdad's markets at dusk often rang with public poetry recitations, where poets competed for crowds by weaving verses praising merchants' wares into elaborate couplets. Some were paid in coins, others merely in leftover fruit. He walks on, each step scraping the bruised flesh of his ankles. His mind is filled with her, the quiet clink of gold bangles, the dark crimson robe embroidered with golden pomegranates, the soft hiss of her silk robes across polished marble. He imagines her sitting on her cushions right now, sipping cardamom coffee, surrounded by silent maids, perhaps laughing softly at his memory. Finally, he reaches the outer edge of the city. Beyond lies the flat, dark plain stretching towards the Tigris, dotted with palm groves and silent irrigation canals gleaming silver in the moonlight. He sits on a fallen brick under a leaning date palm. The breeze sighs through the fronds, cooling his sweat-sticky skin. He leans back against the rough trunk and closes his eyes. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for tonight. Historians still argue whether Abbasid Baghdad's irrigation canals were purely practical or carried ritual significance, symbolizing purification and paradise rivers in architectural layouts. As the moon rises, casting ghostly light across the silent plain, he begins to weep, not the broken sobs of chained humiliation, but quiet tears that slip down his cheeks without struggle, tears that wash away the numbness coating his chest, leaving raw truth in their place. He realizes then that she never cared for him, that he was a toy, a passing amusement, something to feed and chain, a story she would tell her friends as they reclined on embroidered cushions, laughing softly behind perfumed veils. This truth burns through him like a hot knife. But it also brings clarity. You watch as he wipes his face on his torn robe sleeve, breathes deeply, and stands. His legs shake, but he forces himself upright. He turns back towards the city, towards the flickering lamplight spilling from market arcades, towards the scent of spiced chickpeas drifting on the night breeze. And you sense it, the shift inside him. Shame no longer consumes him entirely. Underneath it, anger begins to smolder, anger at her cruelty, at his own blindness, at the chain marks branding him as a fool to every passerby. Anger strong enough perhaps to pull him forward into whatever tomorrow might bring. You follow him as he limps back into the sleeping city, his shadow long and warped under the flickering oil lamps. The streets are nearly empty now. A lone baker tends his embers, preparing dough for dawn customers. 2 guards doze under an archway, their spears leaning against the stone wall, helmets tipped over their eyes. Naji shuffles past them unnoticed, heading towards his small rented room. His bad knee drags so painfully you can almost hear the grinding of bone beneath skin. But his eyes are sharper tonight, glittering in the dark with a new, dangerous clarity. Here's your quirky tidbit to flavor this late hour. Medieval Arab physicians believed knee pain could be cured by a poultice of heated goat marrow mixed with saffron and rose oil. Historians still argue whether this truly healed joints or merely perfumed them before burial. He reaches his door, fumbles with the wooden latch, and slips inside. The room is silent, save for a distant rooster crowing far too early from someone's rooftop coop. He collapses onto his straw mat, sweat cooling on his skin, muscles twitching from exhaustion. The ceiling beams loom above him, black and splintered against the faint moonlight slanting through his shutters. He lies awake for a long time, staring at those beams, listening to the small night sounds, a rat rustling in the clay pot by the wall, the drip-drip of water seeping from a cracked jar, the faint thud of his own heartbeat echoing through the hollow chambers of his chest. Each throb reminds him of his chains. Each pulse carries the scent of her perfume, lodged so deeply in his memory he wonders if it will ever fade. At dawn, he drags himself upright and limps back to the market. The morning crowd is already surging. Donkey carts creak under sacks of onions. Water sellers shout prices over the din. Women in linen robes haggle for copper basins and dried lemons. Naji keeps his head down, avoiding their eyes, weaving through the throng like a wounded ghost. Historians still argue whether markets were truly egalitarian spaces where all classes mingled freely, or whether class hierarchies were enforced silently through clothing, speech, and posture. You see it here now. The slight sneers cast at his ragged robe, the turned shoulders as people move away from his sour, unwashed scent. He stops by the chickpea vendor again. Today, the old man pretends not to see him. Naji lingers in silence, staring down at his bare, swollen feet until finally the vendor sighs, tears a stale corner from yesterday's flatbread pile, and hands it to him without a word. Naji mumbles thanks, turns, and limps away into a side alley. He sits on a broken grindstone, chewing slowly, tasting dust and old oil on the bread. Pigeons strut around his feet, pecking for crumbs. As he eats, he notices a familiar figure weaving through the alley crowd. His brother, the barber. Here's your mainstream historical fact for today's breakfast musing. Barbers in medieval Baghdad were surgeons, bloodletters, circumcisers, tooth pullers, and storytellers, wielding sharp razors in both medicine and gossip. Their small shops bustled with news, rumor, and complaints from all classes. The barber stops when he sees Naji slumped there, hair wild, eyes sunken and ringed with bruised shadows. "Brother," he begins softly. "Brother, what happened to you?" Naji lifts his gaze slowly. His lips part, but no words come out. Only a dry rattle emerges, like the last hiss of a dying coal. The barber crouches before him, taking in the swollen ankles, the limp, the torn robe crusted with old dirt and sweat. "Come," he says gently, wrapping an arm around Naji's shaking shoulders. "Come, I will wash you, I will feed you. You can tell me everything later." Naji allows himself to be lifted to his feet. He leans heavily on his brother as they limp through the alleys towards the barber's small tiled shop. The sun beats down from above, shimmering off the whitewashed walls, making the whole world waver in dizzy golden ripples. They reach the shop, a narrow stall with a single chair, a small brass basin, and an array of razors, tweezers, and bone-handled knives lined neatly on the shelf. The barber settles him onto the stool, fetches a clay pitcher of water, and begins gently washing the grime from his face and arms. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase to carry through this cleansing. Historians still argue whether Barber's ritual washings were driven more by hygiene, religious purity, or a psychological need to wash away worldly humiliation before rejoining the community. Naji sits silent as his brother bathes him, trims his tangled beard, and cuts away the ragged ends of his hair. Warm tears slip down his face, mingling with the water trickling over his cheeks. For the first time in days, he feels clean. For the first time in days, he feels human. His brother doesn't press him with questions. He hums softly under his breath as he works, an old folk tune about love lost across desert sands. The melody winds through the small shop, mixing with the drifting scent of rosemary oil and sandalwood soap. When he finishes, he dresses Naji in a clean linen robe, presses a warm cup of sweet tea into his trembling hands, and says simply, "Rest here today. Tell me your story when your tongue is ready." And so Naji sits in the barber's small shop, sipping tea in silence, the scent of sandalwood filling his senses, the memory of her eyes lingering behind his eyelids like a dark, veiled flame. The hours drift by in the barber's quiet shop. You watch as Naji sits slumped on the low stool, hands wrapped around the small clay cup of tea, though the liquid has long since cooled. His eyes remain fixed on nothing, unblinking, as if he's staring through the patterned tile floor into some darkness only he can see. The barber works around him, trimming an old merchant's wiry ear hair, scraping a young porter's cheeks smooth with deft razor strokes, rinsing blood from blades in a brass basin. Between customers, he glances at his brother, worry creasing his brow. Here's your quirky tidbit to sharpen this still morning. Medieval barbers often served as unofficial therapists, their tiny shops echoing with whispered confessions of adultery, debt, doubt, and jealousy, all for the price of a shave. By midday, the market hum deepens into a roar outside. Sunlight slants through the shop's narrow wooden slats, illuminating floating dust motes that drift lazily around Naji's bowed head. The barber kneels before him, his hands gentle as he lifts his brother's chin. "Tell me," he says softly. "Tell me everything." Naji's cracked lips tremble. Words scrape up his dry throat like gravel. He tells it slowly, each syllable tasting of blood and humiliation, how he saw her standing by the perfume stall, how she invited him with veiled glances, how her boy led him through winding alleys to the silent mansion gates, how he entered trembling with hope, how she fed him cardamom coffee in a chamber glowing with lamplight, how she snapped her fingers, and the chains? The barber listens without interruption, his eyes dark with pity and silent fury. Outside, a rooster crows and is answered by a donkey braying somewhere down the sunlit street. The mundane sounds only heighten the horror of Naji's quiet narration. Here's your mainstream historical fact to flavor this confession. During the Abbasid era, wealthy households were required by law to station a guard at their gate to deter thieves. But historians still argue whether these guards enforced house rules or merely watched silently as household justice unfolded within. When Naji finishes, his voice crumbles into a hoarse whisper. Tears drip from his cheeks onto the robe his brother lent him. His shoulders shake with silent sobs. For a long time, the barber says nothing. He rises, pours fresh tea into the clay cup, and presses it back into Naji's trembling hands. "You will not go to her again," the barber says quietly, but his voice holds an iron edge. "You will not shame yourself further for a woman who sees your pain as entertainment." Naji says nothing. He just stares into the steaming tea, the rising vapor curling around his swollen, bruised ankles like a silent reminder of the chains. That afternoon, the barber closes his shop early. He helps Naji stand, wraps his thin arm around his waist, and guides him out into the sweltering market. They limp down the main thoroughfare past vendors hawking fragrant rice with lamb and cumin, past cloth sellers displaying rolls of imported indigo linen, past the sandal merchants polishing their wares to glowing honey gold. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for the hour. Historians still argue whether urban brotherhood bonds in medieval Islamic society acted primarily as emotional refuge or as survival alliances against economic ruin and public shame. They stop by a stall selling healing poultices. The barber buys a small clay jar of goat marrow mixed with saffron and rosemary oil. The vendor assures him it will ease joint pain and draw out bruising. Naji remains silent as his brother pays. His gaze flickers briefly to a passing woman wearing a veil edged with crimson silk. For a fleeting moment, his chest tightens with hope before he realizes it isn't her. She vanishes into the crowd, leaving only a waft of rosewater perfume in her wake. They continue down to the public bathhouse near the Spice Arcade. The barber pays the entry fee, nods to the doorkeeper, and guides Naji through steamy, tiled chambers echoing with men's murmured conversations and splashing water. The air smells of olive soap and eucalyptus. Inside, they sit on warm marble benches. An attendant pours buckets of steaming water over Naji's head and shoulders, scrubbing away layers of dirt, sweat, and shame. His bruised ankles sting under the hot water, but the pain feels cleansing. His eyes drift closed, tears mingling silently with the water pouring down his face. Here's your quirky tidbit to soften this harsh cleansing. Medieval bathhouses often offered small cups of salted lemon water to drink between steamings, believed to balance the body's humors and prevent fainting. Finally, they emerge cleansed, their robes clinging damply to their bodies. The late afternoon sun hangs low, casting long golden beams across the dusty street. They limp back to the barber's shop. Naji eats a small bowl of chickpeas with cumin and coriander his brother prepares for him, each bite tasting faintly of clay and rosemary oil lingering on his clean skin. As dusk deepens, the barber lights a single brass lamp. Its flickering glow fills the narrow shop with soft amber light. Naji lies down on the straw mat tucked behind the counter, exhaustion pulling him swiftly into sleep, and you stand in the shadowed doorway, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering what dreams will come to him tonight. Chains rattling in a silent marble chamber, or her dark eyes gazing down, veiled and unreadable as ever. Night passes quietly in the barber's small shop, the air heavy with sandalwood and the faint sour-sweet scent of old hair clippings. You stand by Naji as he sleeps on the straw mat, his thin body curled tightly, his bruised ankles tucked under his robe as though hiding them from the world. Each breath rattles faintly, carrying whispers of remembered chains and veiled glances. At dawn, the barber rises, lights a small oil lamp, and begins sharpening his razors in slow, careful strokes along the leather strop. The scrape-swish rhythm fills the silent shop, mixing with the distant first call to prayer drifting over Baghdad's rooftops. Naji wakes with a start, eyes wide and panicked, sweat beading on his brow. For a moment he looks around, confusion clouding his gaze, as though expecting to see marble floors and iron cuffs. But then he sees his brother's broad back bent over his tools, the flickering lamplight casting warm shadows across the patterned tile floor. And he remembers where he is. Here's your quirky tidbit for dawn reflection. Medieval barbers believed sharpening razors before sunrise imparted mystical precision for the day's first shave. Historians still argue whether this was genuine superstition or simply good practice before customers arrived. The barber turns, offers his brother a small smile, and hands him a clay cup of watered milk sweetened with honey. Naji takes it with trembling hands, sips slowly, letting the thick sweetness coat his dry throat. He closes his eyes, breathing deeply as warmth spreads through his chest. When the first customers arrive, a cloth merchant with a graying beard, a young courier with stubbled cheeks, Naji shuffles to the back corner, sitting quietly on the folded mats, knees hugged to his chest. He watches his brother work, listens to the murmured greetings and market gossip floating through the narrow shop. Here's your mainstream historical fact to carry through the morning. Abbasid Baghdad's couriers, known as Barber, carried messages at remarkable speeds, aided by relay stations every few miles, a system inherited from Persian and Roman models. Mid-morning. The barber kneels beside his brother, pressing the jar of saffron and goat marrow salve into his hands. Rub this into your ankles and knee, he instructs softly. It will ease the pain and draw out bruising. Naji obeys silently, massaging the fragrant paste into his swollen joints. The rosemary and saffron scent rises around him, mingling with the sharp tang of shaved hair and sandalwood oil drifting from the front stall. Each touch burns slightly, but beneath the sting comes a gentle warmth that seeps into aching tendons. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for today's quiet hours. Historians still argue whether goat marrow salves were primarily medical remedies or ritual preparations borrowed from pre-Islamic tribal traditions. As the sun climbs higher, the street outside grows crowded with vendors, porters, and stray dogs weaving through the press of sandalwood sellers, henna merchants, and brass polishers. From his corner, Naji watches a woman pass by the shop's open doorway, her veil shimmering with tiny gold discs sewn along the edge. His chest clenches painfully at the sight. He remembers her crimson robe, embroidered with golden pomegranates, the rustle of silk, the way her veiled face tilted as she snapped her fingers and the boy locked his ankles in iron. A soft moan escapes his lips before he can choke it back. His brother looks up sharply, brow furrowing with worry, but says nothing. At noon, the barber closes shop briefly for prayer. He helps Naji stand, and together they walk to the small mosque at the end of the market arcade. Naji limps slowly, leaning heavily on his brother's arm, each step scraping his bruised flesh against the inner seam of his robe. Inside, the cool stone floor soothes his burning feet. They pray side by side, foreheads pressed to woven reed mats, the imam's voice rising and falling in long, soothing cadences. But Naji's prayers are hollow. His mind flickers with the memory of her chamber, lamplight pooling across polished marble, the silent maids watching, the boy's bare feet pattering away with empty cups. After prayer, they return to the shop. The barber fries chickpea patties over a small brazier in the back corner, pressing them into warm flatbread with sprigs of fresh parsley and a sprinkle of sumac. The scent fills the tiny space, sharp and mouth-watering. He hands one to Naji, who eats slowly, each bite heavy with remembered hunger and silent humiliation. Here's your quirky tidbit to flavor this simple meal. Sumac, A sour red powder ground from berry clusters was used across medieval Islamic cuisine, both for taste and its supposed power to purify heavy meats and settle a troubled stomach. That afternoon, the barber works quietly, humming under his breath as he shaves, trims, and massages tense shoulders with rosemary oil. Naji sits silent in the corner, staring down at his bruised ankles, turning the events of his shame over and over in his mind like prayer beads. Outside, the golden late sun slants across bustling streets. Children race donkeys down dusty alleys. Pigeons swirl in gleaming flocks from rooftop to rooftop. But Naji sees none of it. He sees only the flick of her fingers, the silent command, the iron cuffs biting into his skin, and you stand beside him in the quiet, shadowed corner, listening to the barber's rhythmic humming, feeling the pulse of Naji's silent anger and shame thrumming through the narrow shop like the hidden current of a deep black river. As dusk settles over Baghdad, the market noise fades to a low murmur. Merchants roll up their woven mats. Children chase each other home with sticks clacking against stone, and women hurry through the dimming alleys with baskets of flatbread balanced on their veiled heads. In the barber's shop, lamplight flickers against polished razors and brass basins. You watch Naji sit on the straw mat in the back corner, knees hugged to his chest, staring blankly at the tiled floor. His eyes are dry now, but the shadows under them have deepened into dark hollows. The saffron goat marrow salve glistens faintly on his bruised ankles, filling the small space with its bitter herbal scent. The barber finishes his last customer, a weary potter with clay-streaked wrists, then closes the shutters and locks the wooden door. He kneels beside his brother, pressing a warm cup of cardamom coffee into his shaking hands. Naji sips slowly, the familiar spiced bitterness swirling around his tongue, bringing memories that make his throat tighten painfully. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Medieval Arab physicians believed cardamom strengthened the heart and lifted melancholy. Historians still argue whether its use as a mild antidepressant was symbolic, medicinal, or simply because it tasted so good with coffee. The barber sits silently beside him for a while, listening to the muffled market sounds outside. Finally, he says softly, "Tomorrow, I will take you to the hammam again. We will wash away the last of this shame." Naji's fingers tighten around the clay cup. "It will never wash away," he whispers hoarsely. "I will always feel her chains on my skin." His brother rests a calloused hand on his knee. "You will not always feel them. One day, you will speak of this without trembling." But you see in Naji's eyes that he does not believe him. That night, they sleep in the shop, the barber stretched out on a folded mat by the door, his breathing slow and steady, Naji curled in the corner under a thin linen sheet, eyes open in the dark, staring at the faint orange glow of the dying lamp flame. Here's your mainstream historical fact to carry into this sleepless night. Many medieval shops doubled as overnight shelters, with owners bedding down among their tools and wares to guard against thieves and fire in the silent hours before dawn. Naji slips out from under his sheet. His bad knee creaks painfully as he stands, but he forces himself upright. He limps across the small shop, careful not to wake his brother, and opens the wooden door. Cool night air rushes in, bringing the scent of dust, river reeds, and distant wood smoke. He steps out into the sleeping city. The street is empty save for a single stray cat nosing at scraps near a shuttered bakery. Naji limps past it, heading towards the outer alleys. His mind hums with a dark, bitter clarity. He knows he cannot remain in this city. Every shadowed archway, every call to prayer, every drifting scent of mint or cardamom will carry her memory like a blade pressed to his throat. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for this silent departure. Historians still argue whether tales of men fleeing cities after humiliation reflect actual migrations or merely narrative motifs of erasing shame through exile. He reaches the western gate as the first purple light of dawn stains the sky. The guards sit drowsy by their brazier, warming their hands against the dawn chill. One glances at him, but sees only a limping beggar in a torn robe. No threat to the city's peace. They let him pass without question. Outside the walls, the dusty road stretches westward, lined with thorn bushes and low stone ruins glowing pale in the rising light. Naji limps onwards, leaning heavily on a broken olive branch he found by the roadside, using it as a staff to support his throbbing knee. As the sun rises, he passes silent irrigation canals glimmering silver under fluttering palm fronds. Date groves rustle softly in the dawn wind. A flock of egrets lifts into the sky, their white wings catching the new sun like thin slices of ivory. Here's your quirky tidbit for the road. Medieval travelers often tied sprigs of rue or wormwood to their belts to ward off desert fever and snake bites. Naji carries neither, only a clenched jaw and the bitter taste of remembered chains burning the back of his tongue. By mid-morning, the heat grows oppressive. His robe clings damply to his thin back. Each step sends a spike of pain up his leg. But he does not stop. You see in his eyes a growing glint of something cold and unbreakable. Shame has twisted into anger, and anger into resolve. He will keep walking west, away from her eyes, her perfume, her chains, away from the city that swallowed his dignity and spat him back out onto its dusty alleys. And though his knee buckles with every step, his shadow grows longer under the climbing sun, stretching before him like a dark, silent promise of somewhere beyond this burning road. The sun climbs higher, beating down on the dusty road with a relentless glare. You watch Naji limp westward, each step scraping his bruised ankles against the rough seam of his robe. His staff, the broken olive branch, digs into the hard-packed earth, leaving small crescent impressions behind him like a trail of quiet grief. Around midday, he pauses beneath a thorn tree. Its sparse, dusty leaves cast a thin, trembling shadow across his face. He sinks to the ground, breath ragged, chest heaving with exhaustion. His bad knee throbs so fiercely it feels as though a hot iron has been driven through it. Here's your quirky tidbit to flavor this sun-scorched pause. Medieval desert travelers sometimes carried dried lizard skin in their belts, believing it protected against sunstroke. Historians still argue whether this belief was rooted in ritual magic or misunderstood natural observation of lizards' heat resistance. He leans his head back against the rough trunk, closing his eyes. Behind his eyelids, she appears again. Dark, veiled gaze, crimson robe embroidered with golden pomegranates, the faint clink of gold bangles hidden beneath her sleeves. His chest tightens painfully, as though her chain still encircles his ribs, squeezing the breath from him with each memory. But this time, alongside the familiar shame, a flicker of anger pulses hot and sharp. He imagines her sitting now in her marble chamber, sipping cardamom coffee, laughing softly with her maids about the chained fool she toyed with for a week. The thought sets his teeth grinding until his jaw aches. Finally, he opens his eyes, forcing himself upright. He grips his olive branch staff, pushes off the dusty ground, and continues limping westward. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this blazing road. The western highways from Baghdad led towards Anbar, a fortified city built along the Euphrates, famous for its canals and fertile fields that fed countless date groves in the region. By late afternoon, he reaches a small caravanserai by the roadside. A low stone building with an inner courtyard lined with sleeping camels, bales of cloth, and stacks of pottery jars. Merchants sit under reed awnings, sipping sweet tea, their eyes tracking him as he hobbles past. He finds a quiet corner under a crumbling wall, sinks down, and stretches out his throbbing leg. A serving boy with a copper tray passes by. Naji gestures him over weakly, holding out his last copper coin. The boy returns with a clay cup of watered buttermilk and half a flatbread streaked with dried figs. Here's your quirky tidbit to flavor this frugal meal. Medieval buttermilk was often used as a thirst-quenching tonic on desert journeys, believed to cool the blood and ease dizziness under blistering sun. As he drinks, the tangy milk soothes his cracked throat, and the faint sweetness of figs fills his mouth with a fleeting comfort. He leans back against the warm stone, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones like fine sand. Night falls swiftly, bringing cool winds that rattle the reed awnings and carry the scent of dung fires burning in merchant camps. Naji sits awake, watching the shadows shift across the courtyard walls. Above, stars bloom like pale silver poppies scattered across black velvet skies. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for tonight's caravan fireside. Historians still argue whether star navigation techniques used by medieval merchants were inherited from ancient Babylonian astronomy or independently redeveloped through Arab tribal oral traditions. A storyteller begins reciting near the courtyard well, weaving tales of lost princes, jinn-guarded treasures, and women with eyes like dark moons who could turn men to stone with a single glance. Naji listens silently, unmoving, the firelight flickering across his thin, weathered face. Each story of love and betrayal sinks into his chest like a stone into deep water. Late into the night, as the last embers die down, he drifts into a thin, restless sleep. His dreams are fractured, marble floors shimmering under lamplight. The taste of cardamom coffee, the cool iron biting into his ankles, her veil fluttering with a silent laugh that never reaches her eyes. At dawn, he wakes to the soft grumble of camels rising and the creak of harnesses being tightened for the road. He pushes himself upright, every joint screaming with pain, and limps out into the waking day. His path stretches onwards under the pale pink sky, westward towards the unknown, and you watch him as he walks, shoulders bowed, shadow trailing long and thin behind him across the sunlit road, wondering whether he seeks redemption, revenge, or simply a place far enough away that her memory cannot follow. The road stretches before him in a wavering ribbon of pale dust and flickering heat. You follow Naji as he limps westward, his bad knee dragging with each painful step, his olive branch staff tapping against sun-baked earth in a rhythm that seems to echo through the silent morning. His robe clings damply to his back, sweat drips from his brow, stinging his eyes. Around him, thorn bushes quiver in the breeze, casting ragged shadows across the roadside. Far off, a lone hawk circles above the dunes, its sharp cry slicing the still air. Here's your quirky tidbit to flavor this lonely dawn. Medieval travelers often wrapped thin layers of fig leaves around sore feet before sandal straps to prevent chafing blisters. Historians still argue whether this was a purely local practice or learned from Persian caravan masters. By midday, he reaches another caravanserai, this one larger, with domed clay ovens smoking behind its inner courtyard. Merchants unload bolts of indigo-dyed linen, pots of rose jam, crates of citron fruits glowing pale gold in the harsh sun. Naji slips into the shade by the gate, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. He watches the bustling scene with hollow eyes. Once, he would have envied their fat purses and perfumed robes. Now, All he sees are thin veils of illusion covering the same small hungers and humiliations that bind every soul crawling this dusty earth. Here's your mainstream historical fact to carry into this bright, restless afternoon. Abbasid caravanserais often included a small mosque and bath chamber, their endowment stones still standing centuries later, etched with the calligraphy of donors seeking eternal reward. He buys a crust of stale barley bread with his last coin, gnawing it slowly under the shade of a crumbling wall. The bread tastes of grit and old oil, but it fills the aching hollow in his gut. As he eats, he watches two young men leading a skittish white donkey towards the courtyard well, its hooves clattering across sun-bleached stones. For a moment, he wonders what would happen if he simply lay down here and let the sun burn him away. Would she think of him if he died nameless by a roadside well, eaten by jackals and picked clean by hawks? The thought fills him with a bitter, trembling rage. No, he will not give her the honor of remembering his ruin. At dusk, as the setting sun bleeds gold and crimson across the horizon, he limps out of the caravanserai and continues westward. The road is quiet, save for the distant howling of desert dogs and the rhythmic creak of date palms swaying in night winds. Here's your open scholarly debate phrase for these darkening sands. Historians still argue whether night travel by lone pilgrims was common practice or merely literary metaphor for spiritual exile and secret repentance. By midnight, he collapses beneath a stand of gnarled tamarisk trees, their branches hissing softly in the cool breeze. Above, stars burn fiercely against an endless black sky. He lies staring up at them, feeling his heart thud slowly, each beat fainter than the last. He thinks of her silent gaze, the snap of her fingers summoning chains, the soft hiss of silk as she turned away without a single word of dismissal or pity. His chest fills with choking heat, a final surge of pain and sorrow so sharp he nearly cries out, but no tears come. Here's your quirky tidbit to soothe this dying hour. Medieval travelers believed sleeping under tamarisk branches protected them from desert spirits who wandered the dunes by night, whispering madness into lonely ears. As dawn begins to break, he closes his eyes. The cold morning wind brushes his face, carrying the scent of distant river reeds and the faint perfume of flowering henna groves blooming somewhere beyond the western horizon. His breathing grows shallow, chest rising and falling like the last flicker of an oil lamp guttering against darkness. And in those final drifting moments, you see him as he once was, young, eager, trembling before the gaze of a veiled woman who promised paradise with a single flick of her wrist. The boy who believed love could be found in silent chambers behind guarded gates. The fool who traded dignity for illusion and awoke chained at the feet of silent cruelty. But now, his shadow merges with the dawn. The road stretches onwards into pale gold light, empty, silent, endless, and now, you let your breathing slow. Imagine the pale desert sky softening into quiet dawn, the cool breeze brushing across the back of your neck like a gentle hand. Feel your shoulders relax against your pillow, each muscle loosening like silken cords unraveling in the hush of early morning. Listen to the faint rustle of tamarisk leaves drifting through your mind, their whisper softer than sleep itself. Let the scent of ancient sandalwood, cardamom coffee, and cool river reeds wash through your senses, each breath drawing you deeper into stillness. Whatever chains pressed upon your chest today, worries, regrets, restless questions, let them fall away now, rattling softly into silence. There is nothing left to hold here. No marble chamber of memory to trap you. Only the quiet promise of sleep and the far-off glimmer of tomorrow's gentle light. And as your eyes grow heavier, imagine yourself walking westward, too, away from noise and sorrow, into a dawn that welcomes you with warm, golden arms and the promise of peace. Sleep well, traveler. May your dreams carry you beyond all shame and sorrow, into a calm morning filled with soft winds and silent stars.